Every maid in the house ran away after meeting her, until one refused to back down. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had just arrived at the Crawford estate, a large, gleaming house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I carried my small bag, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. The house looked perfect from the outside, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt something heavy in the air. The previous maids had left warnings in hushed whispers, and I soon understood why. Vivian Crawford, the lady of the house, was nothing like anyone I had worked for before. She moved through the rooms with a sharp, commanding presence. Her eyes could pierce through you, and her smile rarely reached them. From the moment I saw her, I knew she thrived on control and fear. I tried to keep to myself, learning the routines, keeping quiet, but it was impossible to ignore the tension she created with every word and gesture. On my very first day, I watched her humiliate one of the newer maids. She had spilled some tea by accident, and Vivian didn't just scold her, she turned the whole dining room into a stage for shame. The maid stood frozen, face red, while Vivian mocked her, calling her clumsy and useless in front of the family. No one stepped in. The silence from the family only made it worse. I could feel the fear radiating from everyone who worked there. I noticed the subtle ways Vivian tested her staff. She would give impossible tasks, watch for any hesitation, and then twist even the smallest mistake into a reason to humiliate someone. It was clear she had driven every maid before me away. I saw their eyes in old photographs left in the kitchen, pale and anxious faces that seemed to warn me without words. Despite everything, I told myself I wouldn't leave. I had my reasons for being here, and I wasn't going to let fear push me out like everyone else. I paid attention to every detail, watched the patterns, the moods, the moments when Vivian's cruelty was at its peak. I kept my head down, spoke only when necessary, and learned to anticipate her moods. Even as I carried out my duties, I felt the weight of every step. I knew one mistake could cost me everything. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet resolve grew. I was determined not to let her control me like she had controlled everyone else. I wouldn't be the next maid to run. I was here to survive, and maybe, just maybe, to change the story of that house forever. The tension in the air was thick, but I breathed steady. I knew this was only the beginning, and every move I made from this day forward mattered. Vivian Crawford ruled her house like a queen of fear, but I had something she didn't expect: patience, resilience, and a mind ready to see her through. Vivian Crawford was a woman who demanded perfection in everything, from the way the silverware was polished to the exact angle of the curtains. She carried herself with an air of entitlement, as if the house and everyone in it existed solely to serve her. Her expectations were impossible, and she never hesitated to remind anyone when they fell short. I soon learned that the maids before me had all quit, some running out in tears, others leaving quietly in the dead of night. The stories whispered in the kitchen and glimpsed in old notes painted a clear picture. Vivian didn't just hire maids, she tested them, broke them, and discarded them when they could no longer meet her impossible standards. Each departure left a shadow in the house, a reminder of what happened to anyone who crossed her or failed to anticipate her moods. Watching her closely, I saw how calculated she was in her manipulation. She had a way of making small mistakes look like disasters and turning ordinary conversations into opportunities to assert control. Sometimes she would spy on the staff, lingering in hallways or pretending to be somewhere else while listening to every word. She pitted maids against each other, planting doubt and jealousy so they would compete for her approval instead of supporting one another. It wasn't just the work she demanded, it was the way she made people feel small. Her words were sharp, her eyes critical, and she knew exactly how to hit where it hurt. A comment meant to seem casual could leave someone questioning their own worth for days. I could see the fear in the other maids, even those who had lasted longer, and I felt it myself. The house carried a heavy, oppressive energy, one that seemed to seep into every corner and shadow. Despite the weight of the household's toxicity, I made a promise to myself: I would not break. I kept my head low and observed carefully, learning the rhythm of her control. I noted how she reacted when someone faltered, how she shifted her attention, and how she subtly rewarded obedience while punishing perceived disloyalty. Each observation was a small piece of a larger picture, one that would guide me if I ever wanted to survive and perhaps even change the rules of this household. Living with someone like Vivian was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, knowing a single misstep could bring humiliation or worse. Yet, beneath the fear, determination grew in me. I knew I had to stay vigilant, learn quickly, and never give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. The house was built on fear, but I resolved not to be afraid. I would endure, adapt, and wait for the right moment to claim my own strength. Being around Vivian taught me about cruelty, control, and manipulation. But it also taught me about resilience. I felt the weight of her presence, but I refused to let it crush me. Every calculated move she made only strengthened my resolve to survive and prove that I would not be just another story of failure in her house. I began paying close attention to Vivian's routines, watching how she moved through the house, how she spoke to the family, and how she tested her staff. I noticed patterns, times when she was more impatient, moments when she overreacted, and small weaknesses she tried to hide behind her strict control. Observing her became a way to survive, and slowly, I started seeing opportunities where she could be outmaneuvered. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen, Eleanor, the house cook, leaned over and whispered, "Be careful with her. She thrives on making people fail. Don't let her catch you off guard." Eleanor's eyes were cautious, but I could tell she wanted me to succeed where others had faltered. She shared stories of maids who had trusted too easily, been set up, or punished unfairly. Her warnings weren't just about work, they were about survival. Taking Eleanor's advice seriously, I began documenting everything. Every harsh word, every impossible demand, every humiliation was noted in my mind and in a small notebook I kept hidden. I didn't write it out publicly, but the act of keeping track made me feel a little more in control. I started connecting patterns, noticing how Vivian's anger often followed a small mistake or a subtle challenge to her authority. I realized that if I were careful, I could navigate the household without giving her the power to destroy me. Suspense built quickly as Vivian began testing me in ways that seemed small but were designed to break my composure. One day, she handed me a task that no reasonable person could complete on time. She watched every move, her expression calm but sharp, as if waiting for me to fail. I felt the tension coil in my chest, but I didn't panic. Instead, I focused, prioritizing what I could realistically do and letting go of what I couldn't control. I realized these tests were more about fear than practicality, and staying composed became a small victory in itself. Every day, I became more aware of the subtle traps she set. She would ask for extra cleaning, then critique the parts one had already done perfectly. She would set one maid against another, whispering comparisons that created doubt and tension. I learned to watch for these moments, to anticipate her manipulation, and to act in ways that kept me safe while still fulfilling my duties. Through all of this, I felt a quiet determination growing inside me. I was learning more than just survival, I was learning strategy. Each observation, each note, each careful response was a piece of a larger plan forming in my mind. I didn't yet know exactly how it would end, but I knew I wasn't going to let Vivian's cruelty continue unchecked. I would endure, watch, and wait for the moment when I could turn everything to my advantage, using patience and careful planning as my strongest weapons. I had started to feel a small sense of connection in the house when I met Rachel, another maid who had been there longer than I had. She seemed kind at first, and I thought having someone to share small moments with might make the days easier. We exchanged quiet smiles and whispered conversations, and for a moment, I let myself believe there could be trust here. But Vivian was always watching, always looking for ways to manipulate those around her. It didn't take long for me to see how she used people against each other. One day, Rachel came to me with a story about a mistake I had made, something small, almost unnoticeable, but enough for Vivian to twist into a bigger issue. I felt a jolt of panic as I realized Rachel had told Vivian, unknowingly, or maybe willingly, becoming part of her game. Vivian didn't waste any time. She made the mistake into a public spectacle, summoning me to the dining room while the family was present. My heart pounded as she spoke with exaggerated disappointment, highlighting the error as though it were a serious failure. Rachel stood nearby, silent and guilty, her face pale. I could feel the embarrassment burning in me, but I held my posture and did my best to stay composed. After that day, Rachel didn't stay. She quietly packed her things and left the house, too afraid to face Vivian's wrath or to continue being caught in her manipulations. I didn't blame her. Fear made people do strange things, but I also realized how lonely the path ahead would be. Vivian had proven that she could use anyone, even someone who seemed loyal, to punish and control. Instead of breaking me, the experience strengthened something inside me. I felt a surge of determination, a refusal to let her have that kind of power over me. I had seen firsthand how she operated, how she preyed on trust and twisted it into betrayal. I knew I had to stay vigilant, not just for survival, but to ensure that her cruelty didn't go unchallenged. I spent the following days more careful, watching everyone's reactions, noting who could be influenced and who might be a threat. I understood now that in Vivian's world, trust could be dangerous, and even the smallest slip could be exploited. But I refused to let fear rule my actions. Each humiliating moment, each betrayal, became fuel for my resolve. I began to plan not just how to survive, but how to turn the tables when the right time came. The lesson was clear: Vivian's control depended on fear and manipulation, but I had learned how to endure it. I would be patient, careful, and unshakable. Her attempts to humiliate me only made me stronger, sharpening my mind and my focus. Rachel's betrayal had stung, but it also taught me a vital truth: in a house ruled by cruelty, the only way to survive was to be smarter, steadier, and braver than everyone else. I would not be broken. As I settled deeper into the household, I began noticing cracks in Vivian's perfect facade. I overheard conversations, stumbled upon old bills and letters, and slowly pieced together a disturbing truth: her wealth wasn't just from her husband's money or smart investments. She had built it on lies, deception, and taking advantage of those who worked for her. Former employees had been exploited, underpaid, or forced out when they questioned her. The more I discovered, the more I realized that Vivian's charm for outsiders masked a web of cruelty and manipulation. Ethan Crawford, her husband, was completely unaware of what went on behind the scenes. He trusted Vivian's version of every story, turning a blind eye to the fear and tension that filled his home. He was polite enough, but inattentive, absorbed in his own work and social obligations. I could see how Vivian used him as a shield, presenting a calm, respectable front while controlling everyone else with an iron hand. His ignorance gave her freedom to act without consequence, but it also gave me a small window to maneuver quietly. I began testing myself, trying small acts of resistance. I corrected minor errors that Vivian tried to blame on others, repositioned items she had intentionally moved to confuse the staff, and subtly undermined her attempts to create tension, all without drawing attention to myself. Each action was careful and measured, designed to expose her manipulations without giving her an excuse to retaliate. It was risky, but it gave me a sense of control in a house where fear had dominated for so long. Vivian's reaction started to shift. I could sense her suspicion, small glances that lingered longer than usual, a sharper tone in her instructions, a sudden shift in her moods. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but I could feel the tension growing. She was aware, in some way, that someone was no longer just obeying blindly. The household became charged with quiet unease, every interaction seemed heavier, every glance more loaded. At the same time, my own emotions were growing more intense. It wasn't just about survival anymore. I felt anger, frustration, and a desire for justice. Knowing the truth about Vivian's exploitation made it impossible to ignore the cruelty I was living under. Every small act of resistance, every careful correction, was a way to reclaim some power in a place designed to strip it away. The days felt longer, filled with tension and anticipation. Vivian's presence was oppressive, but I was learning to move through it with quiet precision. I knew I had to be patient. One wrong move could undo everything I had worked for. But the small victories gave me hope and determination. I could feel the household shifting subtly, the first signs that Vivian's control was not absolute. And I knew, deep inside, that this was only the beginning of a battle I was determined to win. One afternoon, while organizing some old files in the study, I stumbled across something that made my heart race. Vivian had a hidden vulnerability, documents revealing financial strain she had been keeping from Ethan and the family, along with evidence of a past scandal she had carefully buried. It was clear that beneath her polished, controlling exterior, she had weaknesses she worked hard to hide. I realized this was the opportunity one had been waiting for, a way to shift the balance without putting myself in danger. I began to watch the other staff more closely, noticing how fear kept them silent. They wanted to speak out, but Vivian's reputation had them paralyzed. I started subtly building trust, showing small acts of support, sharing advice, offering quiet encouragement, and proving I wasn't just another person to betray them. Slowly, I felt a cautious alliance forming. People were beginning to see that it might be possible to act without being crushed immediately. Then I staged a careful incident. During dinner, I let a small accident happen that seemed like a mistake by chance, but it highlighted Vivian's harsh treatment of a maid who had been new and nervous. The family witnessed her cruelty firsthand, the way she berated someone for something trivial, the way she exaggerated a minor mistake into humiliation. I stayed in the background, unnoticed, letting her anger and overreaction speak for itself. By the time I stepped in to calmly fix the situation, the focus had shifted, and Vivian was left exposed without any proof that I had orchestrated it. After that day, the change was noticeable. Vivian began showing signs of paranoia. She watched everyone more closely, her tone sharper, her instructions more frequent and exacting. She questioned small things, double-checked work unnecessarily, and occasionally snapped at the staff without reason. The cracks in her ruthless demeanor were becoming more visible. She was no longer the untouchable presence she had been when I first arrived. At the same time, the household itself started to feel different. The maids who had once been silent now exchanged small, meaningful looks, and some even followed my lead in minor ways. The tension was still there, but the fear was slowly being replaced with cautious confidence. Vivian's control, while still powerful, was no longer absolute. I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that patience and observation had brought me to this turning point. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about reclaiming some sense of justice and fairness in a place built entirely on fear. Vivian's weaknesses had been exposed, and I had learned how to use them carefully. Every day from this point on became a careful balancing act, but for the first time, I felt that I was not just enduring her cruelty, I was beginning to outmaneuver it. The household tension grew, yes, but it was no longer one-sided. Vivian's paranoia created openings, and I was ready to use them. I knew the most important steps were still ahead, but this turning point gave me hope. For the first time, I saw that her reign of fear could be challenged, and that I could be the one to do it. By now, I had a clear understanding of the house, Vivian, and the staff. I began formulating a careful plan to challenge her, a way to expose her cruelty to Ethan and the family without putting myself directly in danger. I knew it wouldn't be quick or easy. Every move had to be calculated, every action measured. The goal wasn't just to survive, it was to dismantle her control and make sure her manipulations couldn't continue. The challenge was balancing appearances. I had to remain the obedient, quiet maid that Vivian expected, while secretly working toward my plan. Every smile, every nod, every small task I completed had to seem genuine. I learned to act frustrated or exhausted at the right moments, letting her believe she was still in control, while I quietly collected evidence, observed her reactions, and guided other staff members into subtle support without drawing attention to myself. Flashbacks to my early days in the house often came to me as I moved through the tasks. I remembered the humiliation, the betrayals, and the fear. Those memories fueled my resolve but also reminded me of the moral line I didn't want to cross. I wasn't doing this out of pure revenge or hatred. I wanted justice, for myself, for the staff who had suffered, and for the family who had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Each calculated act had to maintain that balance, enough to reveal the truth, but not enough to harm innocence or compromise my own position. Vivian, of course, began to sense something. Her glances lingered longer, her tone sharpened when she spoke to me, and she started questioning my decisions more closely. She seemed almost suspicious of my calm composure, as if she could feel my patience and careful observation as a threat. That psychological battle intensified the tension in the house. Every task, every interaction became a test, not of my skill, but of my ability to maintain control under scrutiny. Despite the stress, I found satisfaction in the small victories. A subtle correction here, a gentle nudge toward truth there, each one moved me closer to my goal. The staff began to respond in small ways, hesitant support, quiet acknowledgement, careful trust. I could feel the shift, slow but undeniable. Vivian's control was strong, but it was no longer absolute. I reminded myself constantly of why I was doing this. I wasn't acting out of anger alone. I had endured her cruelty, witnessed her exploitation, and seen the fear she planted in everyone around her. I wanted to end that cycle, and the plan I was putting in motion was the way to do it. Patience, observation, and calculated action had brought me to this point, and now it was time to begin executing the next steps. The house felt tighter, heavier, but also alive with anticipation. Vivian's paranoia, my careful strategy, and the small cracks forming in her reign created a dangerous, electric tension. Every day was a test, but I was ready. I had a plan, and I would see it through, no matter how long it took. The moment I had been preparing for finally arrived. I carefully orchestrated a situation where Vivian's manipulation could no longer stay hidden. During a family gathering in the living room, I subtly let evidence slip into view, documents, notes, and small details she couldn't deny. Ethan and the extended family noticed, and their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief as the truth began to surface. The most shocking revelation was about a distant relative, someone Vivian had publicly praised and supported. Behind the scenes, she had sabotaged this person's career, ensuring they failed so she could maintain her own image and control. The family listened, stunned, as the pieces came together. Vivian's web of lies and cruelty could no longer be hidden behind charm and authority. Vivian immediately lashed out, her voice sharp, her hands gesturing wildly. She tried to twist the situation, to make it seem like someone else was responsible, or that the evidence had been misinterpreted. But this time I stayed calm. I had rehearsed my actions, my words, and my demeanor. I didn't shout, argue, or panic. I simply stayed collected, letting her anger expose her. My calmness contrasted with her fury, making the truth even clearer to everyone present. The room was tense, every eye fixed on the interaction. Vivian's attempts to regain control failed. Her carefully constructed image cracked, showing frustration, fear, and desperation. She could no longer intimidate or manipulate the family like she had done for years. The power dynamic shifted instantly, where she had once ruled with absolute authority, she now appeared vulnerable and exposed. I could see the household staff reacting too. They had watched silently for years, and now the courage I had displayed gave them hope. Whispers of agreement, subtle nods, and glances of relief passed between them. Vivian's control over them, built on fear and intimidation, began to dissolve. The atmosphere in the house changed, the oppressive tension lifted slightly, replaced by cautious empowerment. Even Ethan, who had been blind to her manipulations, looked at her with new eyes. Questions that had been buried for years began to form, and his trust in Vivian faltered. The family had seen the evidence and witnessed her behavior firsthand. Vivian could no longer rely on her usual tactics to silence or control them. In that confrontation, I realized the plan I had been nurturing for months had worked. I had exposed the truth without putting myself directly in harm's way. Every careful observation, every subtle act of resistance, every note and document I had collected had led to this moment. Vivian's reign of fear was crumbling before my eyes, and for the first time, the house felt like it could breathe again. The confrontation left everyone stunned, but it also left a clear message: cruelty and manipulation could be challenged. Vivian's control was broken, and the household dynamics had shifted forever. The house, once ruled by fear, was slowly starting to change, and I had played the pivotal role in making that happen. After the confrontation, the household began to change in ways I had hoped for but didn't fully expect. The staff who had fled out of fear over the years started to return, some quietly, some reaching out to speak. Their voices added weight to what I had revealed. They confirmed the cruelty, the manipulation, and the small injustices that Vivian had inflicted on everyone. Hearing their stories together made it impossible for anyone to deny the truth. Vivian's influence began to collapse almost immediately. The family, now aware of her behavior, no longer accepted her version of events without question. Invitations to social events, the respect she once demanded, it all started to crumble. Her carefully constructed reputation was unraveling, and she faced humiliation not just in front of the staff, but in front of people she had considered her allies. The power she had held so tightly for years slipped through her fingers. Ethan's attitude changed as well. He began to notice the inconsistencies, the ways she had manipulated him and the family. For the first time, he questioned her motives and started seeing her true nature. It was subtle at first, a glance of doubt, a question asked differently, but I could tell he was beginning to understand what had been happening in his own home. That recognition meant the household dynamic was finally shifting, and Vivian's control could no longer dominate the family entirely. As for me, I felt a deep sense of relief and closure. The months of careful planning, observation, and patience had paid off. My courage to stay and endure, my decision not to flee like the others, and my careful execution of the plan had made a difference. I was no longer just a powerless maid in a cruel household. I had helped change the rules, challenged fear with intelligence and patience, and seen justice unfold in a way that felt real and lasting. The returning staff brought energy and validation that had been missing for years. They shared their own small victories, the ways they had endured, and the ways my actions had inspired them to speak up. The house that once felt suffocating with fear now carried an air of cautious relief. Vivian's threats lost weight, her orders were questioned more often, and the staff no longer feared her as completely as before. I realized that her downfall wasn't just my own victory, it was a collective one. Everyone who had suffered silently finally had a voice. Ethan's growing awareness promised a future where the household could function without fear as the foundation. I had played a central role, but the shift belonged to everyone who had endured and dared to stand up, even quietly, for what was right. For the first time, the house felt like a place where people could breathe, work without terror, and live without constant anxiety. Vivian's reign had ended, and the household had begun to heal. I could finally leave each day knowing that my perseverance, my patience, and my courage had made a real difference. The cruelty that had ruled for so long was broken, and a new balance, built on honesty and accountability, was beginning to take hold. By the time I decided to leave the Crawford household, everything had changed. The fear that had filled every corner of the house was gone, replaced with cautious trust and a sense of relief. I walked through the rooms one last time, feeling the weight of months of tension lift from my shoulders. I had survived, endured, and ultimately challenged a power that had seemed untouchable, and I felt a freedom I hadn't known before. Leaving was not just about escaping the household, it was about carrying the lessons I had learned with me. I thought about every betrayal I had faced, the humiliation, and the fear that had tried to crush me. But I also thought about my resilience, the careful strategies I had used, and the quiet courage that had allowed me to stay strong. The journey had tested me in ways I could never have imagined, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. I had seen firsthand that intelligence, patience, and determination could overcome even the cruelest reign. As I stepped outside, I noticed a new maid arriving. She looked nervous, unsure, and wide-eyed, the same way I had when I first entered. I recognized the fear in her, the tension in her movements. I approached quietly and offered her a small piece of advice, subtle guidance on how to survive and stay strong. It was a small act, but it mattered. I wanted her to know that courage and careful thinking could help her navigate the household, and that she didn't have to endure everything silently. I thought about Vivian, her control shattered, her influence gone, and the lessons she had unknowingly taught me. Her cruelty had been extreme, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. I realized that justice isn't always about punishment, It can also be about standing firm, reclaiming control over your own life, and helping others find their way through darkness. Walking away, I felt proud, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done what I had set out to do. I had not only survived but had also helped change the lives of others in the household. My perseverance had created real change, and that knowledge gave me a deep sense of closure. The moral was clear to me now. Life will place cruelty and injustice in front of you, and sometimes the odds seem overwhelming. But patience, courage, and a clear mind can topple even the strongest walls built by fear. I had learned that the smallest acts of intelligence and bravery could grow into something far larger, and that even in the darkest places, there is room to reclaim freedom and dignity. I left the Crawford house with a sense of empowerment I had never known. I had turned fear into strategy, betrayal into strength, and cruelty into a lesson in courage. And as I walked away, I knew that not only had I freed myself, but I had also opened a path for others to do the same. The house would never be the same, and neither would I.